The morning my name vanished from my own kitchen, it did not happen with shouting. It happened with a brochure. I was buttering toast when I heard my daughter-in-law in the living room say that the baby needed peace and the mother-in-law should move out. The knife paused in midair. My son nodded along I's soft voice, gentler than common sense. He walked to me with a stack of glossy senior apartment flyers and my name written on top like a tidy erasure. I smiled and set my spoon down as if nothing inside me had shifted. "I will think about it, sweetie." That was all I said. That night, when the house went quiet, I opened the safe in my late husband's office and laid the deed, the insurance, and the tax records on the desk, each page stamped with the same thing I felt returning to my bones. Owner, Nora E. Whitfield. I am Nora, 68, widow for 8 years, living on the shore of Lakewood in Michigan, in a 2-story wooden house my husband Edris and I built one weekend and one paycheck at a time. For 30 years, I worked the ER where panic is a language and calm is a cure. I learned there that yelling makes you sloppy. Observing makes you strong. When Aubrey married my son Caleb, her kindness arrived dressed like help. Mom, brighter curtains. Mom, matching dishes. Mom, we should store these old photos before they get dusty. Piece by piece, my house went quiet and bright and empty of everything that said I belonged. Caleb hated conflict. He mistook peace for the absence of raised voices and could not see that silence can be a cage if someone else is locking the door. So I did not argue. I brewed coffee with a pinch of cinnamon the way Edris used to do, and began a log the way nurses do, when facts matter more than feelings. I dated each small shift and wrote who said what to whom. March 12th, curtains replaced for brightness. March 15th, wedding photo removed to avoid dust. March 20th, Caleb slept out because Aubrey needed quiet. When you write truth down, it stops moving. When truth stops moving, it starts to point. Aubrey had a soft talent for turning requests into commandments by attaching 3 little words to each one. For the baby. Do not run the washer in the morning for the baby. Do not cook strong-smelling meals for the baby. Do not talk on the phone before noon for the baby. The rules sounded like compassion, but worked like a rope. I watched her glide through the living room in pale silk, with a hand on her belly, and a playlist called Meditation for Mothers, while my blue porcelain dishes were boxed up in the basement and my husband's portrait disappeared for safekeeping. I did not raise my voice. I added a doorbell camera set, a small recorder behind the bookshelf, and turned on the automatic recording feature on my phone. A woman does not survive the ER on faith. She survives on documentation. One evening, Caleb told me gently that Maple Ridge Senior Living had a shuttle and a Friday dance club. Aubrey circled a studio unit in red pen and wrote perfect for her in the margin. I studied the brochure like a case file and nodded as if my decision were a matter of paint colors rather than my name on the deed. The next morning, I visited the bank, then drove to a lakefront cafe where the windows faced the water, like a promise. I wrote in my notebook, March 22nd. They think I will leave. I'm coming back one step at a time. The wind off the lake smelled like pine and relief. On the sidewalk, I called our attorney, Alan Mercer, the steady man who had helped me settle Edris's affairs. Please reconfirm sole ownership of 112 Lakewood Drive. No co-owners, no liens, no transfers. His text arrived before I finished my coffee. Confirmed. You are the sole owner. I read the words twice, not because I doubted them, but because clarity deserves to be savored. When I returned, Aubrey greeted me with a pale green smoothie and a tone that sounded rehearsed. The doctor says the most important thing at this stage is to avoid stress. Noise and emotional swings can affect the fetus. I wiped dirt from my hands fresh from the garden and told her I would try to speak softly and move gently. There's no diagnosis in obstetrics called mother-in-law at 10 o'clock a.m. syndrome. 30 years in medicine made me immune to misused jargon and the way it can bully the untrained. But I let the line pass through the room like a breeze that leaves no mark. That night, I wrote Caleb's exact words in my log and underlined them. The doctor says stress can trigger contractions. Repeated verbatim from his wife. Even tone. Avoided eye contact. Confusion or complicity unknown. Neighbors began arriving with concern packaged as gossip. Poor thing, your daughter-in-law is so sensitive lately. She says there are too many people in the house and she needs morning sleep. I added a star beside that entry. The narrative had moved outdoors. When someone takes the story to the street, they are preparing the stage. I checked the basement. My blue porcelain set was wrapped in newspaper inside a box labeled Mom's Kitchen. My anniversary quilt sat in a plastic bin marked basement storage. I took a breath and closed the lid. Restraint is not surrender. It is timing. A few days later, my neighbor Paula stopped by with apples and a hesitant look. She said she had seen Aubrey at the Crescent Inn with a man in a dark suit and a silver watch. She had called out and been ignored. I thanked her and wrote every detail in my notebook. That night, when the house went still, I watched the doorbell feed. At 11:47 p.m., a tall man in a dark jacket slipped in without looking up. The camera caught the flash of a silver watch on his wrist before he disappeared down the hall. I saved the clip and renamed the folder Crescent. I did not call my son. I did not confront my daughter-in-law. I made tea with cinnamon, locked the file cabinet, and told the quiet room the rule I had lived by my whole career. Do not confuse drama with action. Action is evidence timing and a steady hand. The man with the silver watch returned on a Tuesday when the house had the sleepy hush of late evening. At 11:06 p.m., the doorbell camera blinked awake and captured his broad shoulders sliding through the frame as if the night itself had opened for him. I watched from my room with headphones on, eyes on the timestamp the way I had watched heart monitors for decades. Caleb had texted earlier to say he would crash at the office to meet a systems deadline. Downstairs, voices softened into the kind of laughter people mistake for harmless. I let the feed roll and saves folder fill while I wrote a single line in ink that did not shake. April 8th, third visit this week. Not Caleb. Silver watch visible. No hurry, no caution. 2 days later, the house bloomed into blush ribbons and stiff smiles without anyone telling me. I turned into the drive to find cars pressed along the curb, balloons wobbling against the porch, and the front door propped wide like a promise. Pink napkins, pale blue paper fans, a cake the color of heavy cream, and a wooden sign that read, "Baby Sprinkle," as if this were always meant to be a house that obeyed its newest occupant. On the gifts table tucked between wrapped boxes and a glass vase, a black and white ultrasound photo sat in a frame. Beneath it, a card someone had lettered by hand. "Welcome, little Pierce Whitfield." I felt the word Pierce land like a cold coin in my palm and did not drop it. I moved through the rooms with the gentle smile of an aunt who stays out of the planning. My phone camera traced the blank spaces where our family frames had hung, lingered on the sashes and party favors, and drifted across the kitchen doorway just as the silver watch glinted again. He stood close to Aubrey, handsome, in a practiced way, the envelope half tucked into her sash. His voice was low, the kind men use when they are already sure of the outcome. "After the baby is born, he will handle it." Aubrey's answering whisper was all breath. "No one suspects a thing." I did not interrupt their scene. I tapped voice memo and let the phone lie flat in my pocket while the room cheered over pink macarons. He greeted me later with a polite Mrs. Whitfield and the quick glance of a man measuring risk. Aubrey said he was a colleague of Caleb's. Of course, I said, and noticed he did not ask which department. I sat in the corner like a kindly portrait come down from the wall to sit with the guests. Between toasts and curated laughter, I caught their silhouettes reflected in the window the way hands hover and withdraw when a room might notice. When the last stack of plates clicked into the sink, I slipped away and renamed 2 files. Sprinkle Proof, Crescent Entry. I backed them up twice, then packed the photos into a slim folder with the calm of someone folding a shirt she intends to wear to court. The next morning, I set the folder on the dining table and waited for daylight to make everything honest. Aubrey walked in with a pale green smoothie and the upbeat voice people use when they can feel a draft, and refused to close the window. "We should set a tour at Maple Ridge before the end of the month," she said. "First month free if we move quickly." I nodded, slid the slim folder open, and turned the notarized deed so the names faced them, not me. Caleb read the lines aloud without meaning to, a habit from childhood. Sole ownership, Nora E. Whitfield. No co-owners, no liens. The room's brightness took on the stillness of an operating room seconds before the incision. Aubrey's smile faltered, then reassembled itself. "Mom, nobody said the house wasn't yours. We're just trying to make life easier for the baby." "Because we are family," I said, voice level. I want everyone to hear this clearly. This house belongs to me alone. All decisions about who lives here begin and end with that fact. 2 of her friends stood there clutching gift bags, unsure whether to sit. I let the paper do the speaking. Paper does not raise its voice. Paper does not get accused of dramatics. Paper does not forget. When I locked the folder in the buffet drawer, the small click sounded louder than any argument I could have staged. That afternoon, the narrative reached the sidewalks. A neighbor texted sympathy. "Heard you might be moving soon. Such a shame, but understandable pregnancy is hard." I sent back a neutral heart and circled the time in my notebook. External pressure applied at 2:15 p.m. I checked the doorbell timeline and found the silver watch again at 11:47 p.m. from the week before, the angle clear enough to show how his palm touched her lower back with ownership. I printed a still and slid it into a plastic sleeve behind the deed. In the evening, I brewed peppermint tea and opened the window so the lake could remind me, breathing is not a privilege someone else grants. The next days unspooled like a rehearsal. Aubrey floated phrases through the house in a tone that sounded like silk. "Long term, you should have your own space. Not for me, for you. For the baby, no calls before noon. For everyone's calm, maybe take your walks later." Each line nested into the next until a woman without a ledger might have believed them. I replied with, "I understand, and I will try, and I hear you," and wrote each sentence in the log with the precision of charting vitals. On April 12th, The baby sprinkle audio set complete the envelope exchange captured the name Pierce, recorded by their own carelessness. On April 15th at 9:10 p.m., Caleb asked me, eyes averted, to please be gentle because stress can trigger contractions. I made tea and repeated my ER mantra in the privacy of my skull. Do not confuse the noise for the diagnosis. 3 nights later, the unknown number arrived, like a nurse stepping into the wrong room and catching the right truth anyway. You should see this, the text read, followed by 3 photos under jaundiced parking lot lights. Hand in hand, palm on belly, a keycard exchanged at a front desk. Each image came stamped with time, location, and a clarity that did not require commentary. I saved them to Crescent Ran metadata checks and watched the pieces lock into place with the soft inevitability of a puzzle clicking home. I did not wake my son. I did not call my lawyer yet. I made a slideshow, pinned the audio, and wrote the last line of the day. Evidence complete. Confidence is their weakness. Timing is mine. By Friday, the storm I'd been steering finally reached shore. Aubrey announced a small dinner to bring the family spirit back. She said it sweetly, as if we hadn't been living inside a Cold War built of smiles. Just a few of Caleb's coworkers' mom. You should be there. You're the heart of this house. Her eyes gleamed, too bright. I smiled back. Of course. I'll be there. That evening, the house glowed with candles and expensive perfume. The dining table gleamed with silverware and a practiced calm. Aubrey moved between the kitchen and guests like a hostess auditioning for sainthood. Caleb was quiet, his smile tight, his eyes somewhere else. I waited until dessert until the laughter thinned and the room relaxed before setting my spoon down. I'd like to share a few photos, I said lightly. All conversation stopped. I placed my phone in the center of the table, its glow washing the linen in pale light. One by one, the images slid past Aubrey and Graham Pierce under the streetlight hand in hand, his palm on her belly, possessive and easy. The 2 of them at the Crescent Inn's front desk, Graham handing over a keycard. No commentary, just evidence. The room's air folded in on itself. Someone's fork clinked softly. Caleb stared at the screen, the color draining from his face. Aubrey, he said, voice trembling. What is this? She blinked too fast, her lips twisting into a trembling smile. It's nothing like it looks. Graham's just a coworker. He's been supporting me emotionally. I swiped to the next file. The audio began to play clear as steel cutting fabric. Graham's voice smooth. Once the baby's born, I'll handle everything. Aubrey's whisper followed. I'm afraid your mother will find out. Graham. She won't suspect a thing. Just keep playing the exhausted wife. No one moved. Caleb's coworkers dropped their eyes to their plates. The soft hum of the refrigerator became the only sound. I turned the phone off and looked at my son. His hands shook against the table. Aubrey. The baby. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping the floor. Are you really going to believe her? She cried. A jealous mother who can't let go? Caleb's voice was hoarse now, stripped of every illusion. I'm listening to you, Aubrey, to your voice. She looked around for an ally, but there were none. Everyone had already heard too much. I stood, slipped my phone into my pocket, and said quietly, Dessert was lovely. Thank you for inviting me. It helped me see clearly. When the guests left, the fight erupted like thunder behind a closed curtain. I didn't need to watch. The walls carried every word. You never understood me, Aubrey shouted. Caleb's voice broke raw, disbelieving. And the baby was it ever mine. Her silence said more than denial ever could. A door slammed, a suitcase rolled, and headlights swept across the living room window. I walked to the porch just as the black Lexus glided down the drive, its taillights vanishing into the night. Inside, Caleb sat collapsed on the sofa face, buried in his hands. I made peppermint tea, set the mug before him, and sat without speaking. After a long while, he whispered, How long have you known? Since the day you stopped meeting my eyes, I said softly. He let out a breath that sounded like surrender. You waited this long. Why? I let the truth speak for itself, I said. We stayed there in silence, the steam rising between us like a fragile truce. When he finally lifted his head, I saw not anger, only the quiet pain of someone who had woken from a long dream. I didn't reach for him, just sat close enough that he could feel my presence. By morning, the air inside the house had changed. It was quieter, yes, but not empty, more like the stillness after a wound is cleaned and bandaged. The walls no longer echoed with soft manipulation. Only the wind through the pines and the gentle creak of the stairs reminded me this house was still alive. Caleb stayed moving through the day, like someone relearning how to exist. We fixed loose hinges, replaced burnt-out bulbs, and hung back the old family photographs. When he smiled just once faintly, I knew my son was finding his way home. Sunlight slanted through the clean curtains the next morning, soft and forgiving. The house smelled of cinnamon and fresh paint. I was dusting the mantel when Caleb came downstairs. His eyes were tired, but the confusion that used to cloud them was gone. I handed him a mug of coffee and said, "You should eat something." He nodded quiet. After a long pause, he whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry for not seeing what was right in front of me." I looked at him, my son older now, not in years but in truth, and said, "You don't have to apologize for being blinded by love. We all learn that sight comes back slower than we want." That afternoon, we packed the remnants of the false life Aubrey had built. Pale pink ribbons, baby sprinkle decorations, glossy throw pillows embroidered with "Home Sweet Home," all wrapped and labeled in boxes. I wrote each label carefully. "Property of Aubrey Whitfield. Hold for 30 days. No anger, just order." When I sealed the last box, Caleb handed me the tape, his hand steady again. "She won't come back for them," he said. I nodded. "Then they'll become just another unclaimed story." For the first time in months, the house felt breathable. I rehung Edris's portrait above the fireplace and watched the sunlight catch the smile that had guided me through half a lifetime. The blue porcelain dishes that had once been hidden in the basement gleamed on the shelves again. I brewed cinnamon coffee, opened the windows to let in the lake breeze, and for a moment, I heard Edris's voice as clearly as the day he'd said it. "A house isn't alive until it smells like something made with love." Caleb stood in the doorway watching me. "It feels like the house is back," he said. I smiled. "It's more than that, son. It's been washed clean." He nodded, and together we began restoring what had been erased, small acts of reclamation, tightening screws, fixing the porch swing, repainting the guest room that had once been called the nursery. I chose a warm sand color Edris loved. On the nightstand, I placed a lavender vase. The air felt different. Peace doesn't need to shout. It hums quietly when things fall back where they belong. Weeks passed, and the 30-day period came and went without a word from Aubrey. Her silence was its own confession. A letter from Attorney Mercer arrived one morning, confirming that all legal matters were settled. No claims, no contest. The house was solely mine, untangled from deceit. I folded the letter neatly and placed it beside the property deed in the safe, the final seal on the storm's end. But even peace can echo with too much quiet. One evening, as I cleared the dinner plates, I realized the house had grown still again, clean bright, but heavy with solitude. The guest room was empty, the bed crisp and unused. For years, I had feared losing this space. Now I had it back entirely, and the silence felt vast. That night, while reading the paper by the window, my eyes stopped on a small notice: Lakewood Women's Center seeks temporary housing for domestic violence survivors. I stared at the words until the letters blurred. Then I picked up the phone and called. "This is Nora Whitfield," I said when a tired but kind voice answered. "I don't know if it helps, but I have a spare room. They can stay here free for the first month if needed." 3 days later, Janelle arrived. She was 42 with weary eyes and a bruise she didn't bother to hide. She carried one plastic bag, nothing else. I didn't ask questions, just showed her the kitchen, the bathroom, and the small sand-colored room with lavender on the nightstand. "Here's the key," I said. "You don't owe me explanations. Just rest." That night, I woke to the faint clatter of a mug. Janelle stood in the kitchen, startled when I appeared. "I'm sorry," she whispered, clutching the cup. "I just wanted tea." I smiled and pulled out a chair. "In this house," I said gently, "you never have to apologize for needing peace." She sat, eyes wet, but calmer. For the first time since Edris died, I felt the house breathe not for me, but for someone else who needed its warmth. Over the next weeks, small sounds filled the rooms again. The kettle whistling, the creak of the porch swing, the soft thud of footsteps that didn't come from ghosts or betrayal, but from people rebuilding themselves. When Janelle finally left, she left a note on the table. "Thank you for giving me back air." I held it for a long time, realizing that healing was not only something you win back, it's something you pass forward. 2 weeks after Janelle left, the phone rang again. The voice on the other end belonged to the same woman from the Lakewood Women's Center. "Mrs. Whitfield, there's a young mother and her child, 2 years old. We're out of space. I wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate." I didn't hesitate. "Bring them," I said. That afternoon, a small car stopped in front of the house. A young woman stepped out, Mariah 23 thin as paper, holding a boy with wide, frightened eyes. "This is Ollie," she said softly. "We won't be trouble." "You're not trouble," I answered. "You're guests." I led them inside, showed them the spare room, and crouched down so Ollie could see my face. "Do you like toy cars or blocks?" His lip quivered, but he whispered, "Cars." I pointed to a basket by the window. "Then you're in luck. I've got plenty." Over the next days, the house began to sound alive again. Mornings came with the patter of small feet and laughter that bounced off the walls like sunlight on water. Mariah cooked simple meals, humming under her breath. In the evenings, I'd hear her singing Ollie to sleep, a lullaby soft enough to make the air listen. Sometimes, I'd catch her staring out at the lake, lost in thought. I didn't ask what she was remembering. Healing needs silence more than advice. One evening, as we washed dishes together, she said quietly, "You have no idea how safe this house feels." I smiled. "I do, actually. It wasn't always that way." She looked at me puzzled, but I didn't explain. Some stories are better understood through what they've become, not what they were. When Caleb came home that weekend, he stopped in the kitchen doorway and listened to Ollie giggling in the next room. "Mom," he said, "are you fostering people now?" "Not fostering," I replied, "just lending warmth. The thing I used to think was running out." He looked around the lavender on the table, the half-finished drawing taped to the fridge, the smell of soup on the stove. "It sounds different in here," he said. "It does," I agreed. Now it breathes again. The weeks turned into a rhythm. On Fridays, we shared dinners together, me, Caleb, Mariah, and little Ollie. We took turns cooking. Sometimes Caleb brought his coworker friends curious about the Lakewood house that never turns anyone away. The laughter returned, not forced, not loud, just real. When Mariah left a month later, she hugged me tightly. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "Then don't," I replied. "Just keep breathing." She smiled, placed Ollie's tiny hand in mine for a moment, and whispered, "You saved us." After they drove away, the house fell quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that wounds. This silence was full like a lung after a deep breath. I sat on the porch and watched the sunlight ripple over the lake. That evening, I painted a small wooden sign and hung it beside the door. The letters were simple, brushed in white. Whitfield Room 30-day bridge. Below it, I added a line, "A place to rest, not to stay lost." Within a month, more people came, each with a story they didn't have to tell. A teacher recovering from burnout, an older widow between homes, a teenager who had nowhere to go after leaving her parents' house. They came, stayed healed, and left. I asked for nothing but one shared meal before they went, so the house could remember their laughter. One evening, Caleb joined us for dinner. The table was crowded with plates and stories. Janelle had returned for a visit. Mariah sent a letter with a photo of Ollie smiling beside a red toy car. The air hummed with the warmth I once thought I'd lost forever. Caleb raised his glass and said softly, "Mom, you turned this house into something I didn't know a home could be. You're not just helping people, you're saving them." I shook my head. "I'm not saving anyone. I'm just opening a door. They save themselves once they walk through it." After everyone left, I sat in the quiet living room. The family photos glowed under the lamp. Edris's portrait smiled from the wall, and beside it, I'd hung a small key, the first one I ever turned when we moved here. Below it, a brass plate read, "A home keeps its light when you share it." I realized then that revenge hadn't restored me. Love had. The kind of love that expects nothing back. The kind that grows stronger after being tested by betrayal. As I looked out the window at the still surface of Lakewood, the reflection of my house shimmered like gold across the water. Caleb stepped outside with 2 mugs of tea and draped a blanket over my shoulders. "Mom," he said quietly, "you should tell your story one day. People need to hear it." I smiled. "Those who need it will find it, son. Some storms are warnings, others are lessons." He nodded. We sat together, listening to the wind move through the willows, gentle now, no longer a threat. The night felt endless but kind, and I understood at last the home I fought for wasn't made of wood and stone. It was made of truth, courage, and the quiet decision to let light back in. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Every comment, every share, keeps the light in this house alive.